I came back from my morning run, sweat still cooling on my neck, and found a man in a neon vest wrapping survey tape around my grandmother's apple tree like it was a crime scene. "You mind telling me what you're doing?" I asked, already knowing I wasn't going to like the answer. He barely looked up from his clipboard. "Clearing boundaries for community enhancements starts Monday, HOA directive." I blinked at him. "You're standing on private property." He smiled the way people do when they don't think you matter. "That's above my pay grade, sir. We're just marking trees for the new play area." Nah. He pointed toward a twisted old apple tree with a small metal plaque at its base. The plaque read, "For Ruth. 1954 முதல் 2003 வரை, my mother." That tree wasn't just planted, it was placed by my grandfather on the day she was born, and this guy was acting like it was a chunk of scrap wood in the way of a jungle gym. I didn't yell, I didn't make a scene, I just said, "You've got 30 seconds to leave my land before you're fertilizing it." He left, and that was the moment I knew something bigger was going on. My name's Travis Halbrook, but everyone in Stone Pine Bluff just calls me Trav. 42, divorced once, allergic to pretentious wine tastings, and deeply in love with the land I grew up on. I moved back here 5 years ago to take care of my dad during his last run with cancer. After he passed, I stayed. Not for the town, which had gotten a bit shinier and smugger while I was away, but for the land. Specifically, the Orchid, 5 acres of Carolina clay and memory. My granddad planted the first trees the year Truman left office, and every generation added their own. Some families pass down jewelry or china. We pass down trees. Each one has a name and a story. Some sweet, some complicated, all ours. You can walk the rows and read the whole family history, from Eleanor 1947 with the delicate pink blossoms, to Daniel 1980, the stubborn Granny Smith that's never produced a single apple but refuses to die. My dad once told me the orchard remembers, that it absorbs everything, the storms, the droughts, the births, the goodbyes. So when I moved back, I didn't just inherit land, I inherited responsibility. It's not just my backyard, it's a living will. And as far as I knew, it wasn't under anyone's control but mine, or so I thought, until the president of the local HOA decided otherwise. That morning with the surveyor was just the first rustle before the storm, a little crackle of interference, but even then I felt it, that cold shift in the air, like something old and important was about to be bulldozed by someone who'd never planted a damn thing in their life. And all I could think was, not this time. About a week after the whole tree tagging incident, I got a knock on my door at 7:15 in the morning, that special hour when nobody sane wants to be social, but HOA presidents consider it prime business time. I opened the door, wearing a Carhartt hoodie and a mug that said, "World's Okayest Landscaper." She was in a tailored pantsuit like she was about to go defend an oil company in court. "Mr. Halbrook," she said, extending a manicured hand like we were going to seal a business deal. "Trav," I replied, not shaking it. "What's this about?" She launched into a practiced smile. "I'm Valerie Cummings, president of the Stone Pine Bluff Homeowners Association. I wanted to discuss a potential collaboration regarding your property." I just stared at her, not rudely, just long enough to make it weird. "Well," she continued, undeterred, "we've had several wonderful suggestions from community members about utilizing open space for the benefit of all residents. Your parcel borders 2 key roads, and the orchard is underutilized." I blinked. "Underutilized," I repeated, as if she just insulted my mother's casserole. She kept smiling like she was talking to a child. "There's a vision taking shape, a shared green space, a community garden, perhaps a small park, walking trails. We're calling it the Harmony Initiative." "Harmony Initiative," I muttered. "That what you're calling it when you take other people's land without asking?" Her smile faltered just slightly. "We're not taking anything. We'd simply like to partner with you. The HOA has funds set aside for improvements, and of course increased community use would raise property values." I laughed, not because it was funny, more like my body's way of making sure I didn't slam the door in her face. "You're gonna raise the value of my property by cutting down 70-year-old trees and building a swing set where my uncle used to read poetry with a flask in his hand." She blinked, clearly not programmed for that kind of pushback. "Look," I said, softening just enough to pretend I was still polite. "This land's been private for generations. It's not part of the HOA. It never was. You can check the deeds. I did. Twice." Valerie didn't argue. She just stepped back, smoothed her blouse, and said, "Well, we like to think of Stone Pine Bluff as one community. Boundaries are just lines on paper. Sometimes what's best for the neighborhood requires a little flexibility." She left before I could come up with the comeback I really wanted, but I stood there for a good 5 minutes thinking, that wasn't a friendly visit, that was a warning shot. I didn't know it yet, but she'd already started putting her plan in motion. The first little violation came 3 days later. I was driving back from the farmer's market with a truck bed full of compost and cider orders when I saw it. One of those laminated signs on a stake stuck in the ditch at the edge of my property. Bright green and cheerful, like a dentist's office flyer. It read, "Future site of the Stone Pine Community Meadow, a project of the Harmony Initiative. Sponsored by the Stone Pine Bluff HOA." My name wasn't mentioned. My consent hadn't been asked, but my land was on that sign like it belonged to them. I yanked it out of the ground, tossed it in the bed of my truck, and drove home in silence. They'd fired the first real shot. Now it was my move. About 2 days after I pulled up that sign, I got my first compliance notice from the HOA. It was slid into my mailbox, folded in thirds like a church bulletin, and printed on that stiff, off-white cardstock that just screams passive aggression. No envelope, just a single sheet with the HOA logo at the top and a list of alleged infractions that read like someone had walked around my property with a clipboard and a grudge. Tree branches extending beyond acceptable visual line of sight, Section 4.2. Overgrown natural vegetation perimeter, Section 3.5b. Unapproved signage, private property, no trespassing. Not compliant with design standards, Section 2.7. Now, mind you, I'm not part of the HOA. My land was never included in the original charter. It predates their master plan. My grandfather made damn sure of that when he carved this parcel out of the original homestead and recorded it separately. But here they were, acting like I'd just violated their neighborhood feng shui by letting a Virginia creeper vine live its best life along my fence line. I called the HOA office, got voicemail, drove down there, door was locked due to staff restructuring, left an email, auto-reply. So I did what any rational adult does when cornered by bureaucracy. I posted the notice on my shed with a big Sharpie arrow pointing to it and wrote, "These people think I work for them." Didn't take long for someone to see it. The next week, I noticed a brand new wooden sign hammered into the edge of the orchard where the rows of trees meet the main community walking path. Same cutesy design as before, pastel green, scripted font. Only this one said, "Coming soon, Children's Pollinator Garden, a shared space for growth and togetherness. HOA designated area, do not disturb." That one was zip-tied to a metal stake and set in concrete, like they knew I'd pull another one. This time, it felt more deliberate, like they wanted to see if I'd escalate. But the worst part? It was staked right next to my grandfather's tree. George Halbrook, 1922 to 2001. He planted it after returning from the war. I remember he used to sit there in the evenings with a cold bottle of cheerwine and tell me stories about how the town used to be nothing but dirt roads and chicken coops. And now they'd parked a sign next to it like it was some blank canvas for HOA beautification. So I took that one out too, but I did it carefully. No smashing, no dramatics. Just pried it loose and set it at the end of my driveway with a note taped to it. Lost? Found on private land. Please return to HOA office. 2 nights later, someone broke one of the metal nameplates off the memorial tree we planted for my mom. Snapped clean at the base. The plate was gone, just gone, and the little stake that held it had been bent backward like someone stepped on it on purpose. I didn't cry. I just sat under the tree for a long time, long enough that my dog came over and laid down next to me without being called. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even angry. Not yet. Because up until that moment, I'd been treating this whole thing like a disagreement. A really stupid, frustrating, probably illegal disagreement. But breaking that plate, that wasn't paperwork. That was personal. And I realized something real clear. They weren't just trying to take space. They were trying to erase history. Not just my land, my family, our name. They wanted it gone, paved over with community herb gardens and professionally landscaped reflection spaces where you could sip imported cucumber water and pretend like none of us had ever been here. So yeah, I was done playing nice. But I wasn't about to lose my temper and give them the story they wanted. Angry loner, lashes out at community. No, I'd been raised better than that. And I had another card to play, one they wouldn't see coming. First thing I did was take a breath. A long one, the kind where your lungs stretch so far it almost hurts, just to remind yourself you're still the one in control. Then I got to work. I gathered every scrap of paperwork my dad and granddad ever filed. Old deeds, survey maps, tax documents. Some of them were so old the paper felt like it might disintegrate in my hands. I even found a photo of my grandfather standing next to the orchard marker post holding a coffee can full of soil like it was treasure. The back had his handwriting, Lot 23B, not subject to HOA, underlined twice. Next, I went to the county clerk's office, took a number, sat in that beige-tiled lobby for over an hour next to a guy trying to open a vape store and a woman arguing with someone over speakerphone about a pontoon boat. When my number finally came up, I handed everything over to a clerk named Denise, who looked like she'd been doing this job since the Reagan administration, in both attitude and hairstyle. To her credit, she was thorough. Took one look at my documents, pulled up a few things on her screen, and said, "Yeah, your parcel's not in the HOA overlay, never has been. It's its own designation, separate plat filing. You're clean." "Can I get that in writing?" I asked. She gave me a look like I'd asked if water was wet, then printed out a certified map with her initials in the corner and stapled it to a letter that basically said, "This land is not under the jurisdiction of Stone Pine Bluff HOA, and any assumption otherwise is incorrect and legally unenforceable." I wanted to frame it, but I took it straight to the HOA office instead. This time, the door was open. A woman at the front desk looked up with the cautious smile of someone who's dealt with more than one shouting match over grass height regulations. "Hi," I said. "I need to speak with Valerie Cummings." She gave a tight smile. "Ms. Cummings is in a meeting." "Great," I said, placing the documents on the counter. "Then please give her this. It's a certified land exclusion from the county, and let her know I expect those signs removed, all compliance notices retracted, and a formal acknowledgement that the HOA has no claim to my property." She didn't reply, just looked at the documents like they were radioactive. That night, I got an email, short and smug. "Mr. Halbrook, thank you for providing your perspective. We are currently reviewing the status of Lot 23B in relation to the recently updated Community Improvement Map. Please be advised that our intention is solely to foster cohesion and mutual benefit. We look forward to further discussion. Valerie Cummings, President, Stone Pine Bluff, HOA." Perspective. Right, like my land was just a matter of opinion, so I figured, okay, let's try one more route. I emailed the town zoning board, filed a formal complaint about unauthorized signage and trespass on a parcel zoned agricultural private, attached the county map, the HOA letter, and photos of the signs on my land. I waited for 2 weeks. Nothing. Then I got a voicemail from a zoning clerk who sounded like he was half asleep and reading off a script. "Yeah, hi Mr. Halbrook, we reviewed your concern and, didn't find sufficient evidence to intervene. Looks like the HOA acted under their current improvement plan, so unless you file a civil claim, there's not much we can do. Thanks." That was the moment I realized I was fighting a ghost. Valerie wasn't just pushing boundaries. She was the system in Stone Pine Bluff. City council dinners, country club fundraisers, donation checks with her name on the line. Her HOA wasn't a board. It was an empire. She didn't need to be right. She just needed to outweight me, outpaper me, outdrain me. And from the looks of it, she'd done this before. I wasn't going to win this thing by being polite, but I still didn't want a war. I wanted the truth to come out. Clean, public, loud. That's when I remembered the boxes in my dad's shed, the ones nobody touched after he passed. Turns out the truth was waiting for me there, under a drop cloth, behind an old tiller, in the last place I expected to look. And once I opened that box, everything changed. So the shed behind the house isn't much to look at. Tin roof, warped siding, smells like fertilizer and memory. My dad used to call it the museum, mostly because he never threw anything away, especially if it had even a whiff of sentimental value or practical use. I was digging through old crates looking for a flagged stake I could use to mark the edge of the property when I kicked over a plastic bin full of file folders. I almost ignored it. Thought it was just more water-damaged tax stuff from the 90s, but the top folder was labeled in my grandfather's handwriting, "Do not discard, rare species docs." I opened it, figuring it was going to be something about heirloom apples or tree grafting techniques. Instead, I found maps, black and white surveys with hand-drawn notes, correspondence from the state's Department of Natural Resources, a couple of faded Polaroids, and near the bottom, a typed letter on official-looking letterhead dated 1986. It was from a botanist at UNC who had apparently done a private field study on the orchard, back when my grandfather was still alive and kicking. According to the letter, the orchard contained a small but viable cluster of Spiranthes ochroluca, a species of wild orchid that's protected under state conservation law. Let me say that again, just in case you missed it. Protected by state law. According to the letter, it was one of only a handful of naturally occurring sites left in the Piedmont region. They'd flagged it for potential registration as a preservation zone, but my grandfather declined at the time, said he didn't want government suits turning the place into a nature theme park. Still, the data was logged, and the presence of a protected species? That doesn't expire just because you didn't sign the dotted line. I spent the rest of the night Googling. Turns out, if you've got documented evidence, even old, of a protected species on your land, any major alteration without a state environmental review becomes legally dicey, and if the species is considered at risk, it's basically a legal force field. And this orchid, still listed as vulnerable, still protected, still rare enough that conservation groups jump at the chance to verify a new site. So I did what any good Southern boy raised on biscuits and spite would do. I called the one person I knew would care. Her name was Allison Quinn. She runs a nonprofit in Raleigh focused on native flora conservation. We met once at a soil workshop years ago, and I remembered her because she wore hiking boots to a hotel ballroom and had no time for bureaucratic nonsense. I sent her scanned copies of the documents, photos of the orchard, and a sample of the soil data my dad had recorded. She responded less than 2 hours later with a single line. "If this holds up, it changes everything. We're coming down next week with a team. Don't touch anything." And just like that, I wasn't the weird guy fighting the HOA anymore. I was the steward of a protected ecological site. A site the HOA was trying to turn into a playground. Let that headline sink in for a second. Now, I didn't tell Valerie, not yet. I wanted the science team to come out first, make it official, lock it in, but I did start preparing. Because if they found what I thought they'd find, if those orchids were still here, still growing under the soil my grandfather cared for his whole life, then this wouldn't be a property line dispute anymore. It would be a full-blown scandal. And Valerie Cummings? She'd finally be on the wrong side of a fight she couldn't control. The following Tuesday, a white van with state plates pulled up my drive, and 4 people in hiking gear spilled out like they were arriving at a national park instead of my backyard. Allison Quinn was the last to step out. She wore the same boots I remembered and carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. She gave me a nod. "You weren't kidding, Trav. This place is a damn time capsule." Over the next 5 hours, they combed the orchard row by row, took samples, logged GPS points. At one point, I watched one of the interns get visibly emotional, kneeling next to a cluster of grass that apparently contained a confirmed orchid rhizome emergence. I don't pretend to know what that means, but the kid looked like he'd seen a unicorn. By sunset, Allison had what she needed. She sat on the tailgate of my truck, flipping through her notes, then looked up at me and said, "It's all here, still viable, and blooming in 2 weeks, full confirmation, we're filing with the state tonight." Then she gave me a look, that slow, serious, "You ready for this?" look, and said, "You want this thing protected, Trav? For real? Then it's time to go loud." I didn't even hesitate. Let's go loud. That night, I put together a press packet. Photos of the orchard, the original letter from '86, screenshots of the bogus HOA signs, the county clerk's letter confirming my land wasn't in their jurisdiction. I even threw in a picture of the broken nameplate from my mom's tree, because if I was going to fight this in public, I wanted people to feel it. I sent it to every local news outlet within 100 miles, small town papers, Facebook pages run by retired journalists, a college radio station, anywhere that might care. But the real move? I called in a favor from an old buddy of mine, Alex Ramirez, who runs a YouTube channel called Soil and Soul. He does deep dive features on land disputes, environmental fights, small town politics. Think John Oliver meets Farming Simulator. He owed me for helping him out during a pesticide scandal a few years back. I told him what was going on. He didn't even let me finish before he said, "I'm coming down this weekend. We'll shoot the whole thing. Orchard tour, interviews, drone footage if you'll allow it. HOA, corruption, rare species, old family land. That's viral fuel, my friend." And then, just to twist the knife, I made one more call. This one to the mayor's office. I wasn't expecting much, but I wanted it on record that a conservation team had documented a protected species on private land currently being targeted by non-authorized development. The assistant said she'd pass it along. Translation, nothing will happen unless people start watching. So that was the plan. Let the scientists lock it in. Let the story go public. Let Valerie Cummings try to explain to the state, the town, and her precious HOA members why she tried to bulldoze a native orchid sanctuary for a splash pad. I wasn't going to fight her in court. I was going to fight her in daylight. That Saturday morning, I woke up to find 3 news vans idling near my fence line, 2 volunteers from the conservation group setting up folding tables with pamphlets, and Alex Ramirez flying a drone over my orchard like he was filming a National Geographic special on America's most passive-aggressively contested landscapes. It was showtime. Alex mic'd me up for a sit-down interview under the tree my grandfather had planted in '47. I wore my regular work shirt and didn't shave, figured I'd lean into the grizzled steward of endangered nature look. He asked me about the orchard, about the family history, about the first time I realized something was off with the HOA. I told the truth, Calm, straightforward, not a rant, just facts. Then I showed the camera the nameplates on the trees, talked about the night someone snapped the one that said Ruth, let the silence hang just long enough. From there, it snowballed. Local papers showed up. A couple folks from the neighborhood wandered over with coffee, just to see what was going on, but stayed for the whole tour. Allison gave a short talk about the Spiranthes orchid, and people actually clapped. Someone asked if they could volunteer to help protect the space. Another offered to donate benches. It started to feel less like a protest and more like a garden party with a mission. Valerie didn't show up that day, but her name was in every conversation. And then came Sunday. That's when Soil and Soul dropped the video, the orchard they tried to erase, one man versus the HOA machine. It had everything, slow-mo shots of the orchard in golden light, close-ups of the orchid clusters, me holding that 86 letter, dramatic piano music, and a side-by-side map showing how Valerie's HOA tried to claim land they never owned. It went viral by Monday afternoon. Reddit picked it up, environmental pages, HOA horror stories forums. Even one of those TikTok lawyers did a reaction video explaining why Valerie might be in OSHT legal territory. And then the flood started. My inbox blew up with messages from other folks in town, some who'd had run-ins with Valerie before, others from across the state who'd fought their own HOA wars. One guy from Asheville wrote, "They tried the same thing with my trout stream. Thank you for standing up." Even the mayor's office got involved. A public statement was released saying they'd been made aware of environmental sensitivities on Lot 23B and were initiating a review of community planning boundaries and HOA practices. Translation: Valerie, duck. But just to make sure the message landed, I did one last thing. I printed out a high-resolution image of the Spiranthes ocraluca orchid and tacked it to the same wooden stake Valerie had used for her pollinator garden sign. Underneath, I stapled a note that said, "Pollination occurring naturally since 1947. No HOA approval required." I placed it right back at the property edge. People stopped and took photos. One lady laughed so hard she spilled her iced coffee on her yoga mat. But the best moment? Tuesday morning, I walked out to grab the paper and saw Valerie's Lexus slow roll past my driveway. She didn't stop, didn't wave, just stared through the windshield like she'd seen a ghost in the trees. She finally understood. This wasn't just a guy with some trees, this was a whole town waking up, and I wasn't standing alone anymore. By the end of that week, Valerie's carefully shellacked world cracked like a dropped casserole dish at a church potluck. It started subtle. A few HOA members showed up at her next closed-door planning session and asked why they weren't informed about an endangered species growing on a parcel she was trying to claim as part of the Harmony Initiative. She brushed it off, apparently said it was misinformation. Problem was, one of those members had already watched the Soil and Soul video twice and had screen-grabbed the county maps. Strike one. Then the local news ran a follow-up story. Rare orchids threatened by HOA development, community rallies around orchard owner. The headline was polite. The comments were not. Strike two. But strike three? That came courtesy of a very curious reporter from the State Environmental Agency who, according to a very enthusiastic voicemail I got, found significant irregularities in how Stone Pine Bluff HOA has been representing zoning boundaries in public communications. That's government speak for somebody's about to get audited. Turns out Valerie had been slowly redrawing her little empire with each neighborhood newsletter and planning update. Nothing drastic, just a foot here, a jog there. Enough that by the time anyone noticed, they were standing on someone else's lawn and calling it a community project. The kicker? She'd already accepted a grant, a state-funded beautification grant, based on the assumption that the Harmony Initiative had full access to the proposed land, meaning my land. Now that's fraud. When that hit the press, everything exploded. The HOA called an emergency general assembly. I wasn't invited, obviously, but several folks who had once crossed the street to avoid talking to me suddenly became real friendly and happy to recap every detail afterward. Valerie showed up late, flustered, with a binder and a smile so forced it looked like it was hurting her jaw. She tried to pivot, blamed the clerical confusion on a junior staffer who no longer worked there, claimed the signage was part of a draft vision board. She even had the nerve to say she'd personally spoken with the property owner about collaboration. That's when Barb Trent stood up. She's a retired court clerk who now bakes cinnamon rolls the size of your head and suffers exactly zero nonsense, and said, "Trav Hallbrook is the property owner. He's standing outside right now. Maybe we should invite him in and ask if that conversation happened." There was a long silence. Then someone else, I think it was Kevin, the guy with the koi pond Valerie made him fill in last year, chimed in with, You also said his land was HOA managed. County clerk's office says otherwise. The room turned. Fast. By the end of the meeting, Valerie was asked unanimously to step down, pending further investigation. Half the board resigned within days. The rest called for a complete review of the HOA's practices, budget, and, this is my favorite part, their ethical communication policies. I was asked to submit a formal statement for the board minutes. I did. It was 1 sentence long. Next time you try to steal something, make sure it's not already in bloom. The next week, I got a knock on my door. It was Greg Morin, one of the newer board members, holding a pie and looking like a kid returning a stolen baseball. "We'd like to formally apologize," he said. "And, we're hoping you'll help us come up with a plan to better protect green spaces around the neighborhood." I told him I'd think about it. Took the pie, though. It was pecan. Oh, and as a final cherry on top, Alex's video passed 500,000 views in 10 days. Someone made a remix of Valerie's draft vision board quote layered over banjo music. It went viral on TikTok under the hashtag #OrchardGate. Poetic justice, one meme at a time. It's been about 3 months since the last laminated HOA sign came off my fence. The orchard's quiet again, the kind of quiet you only get in late spring when the breeze moves like it's got nowhere to be and the bees sound like they're humming just for you. The Spiranthes orchids are blooming now, small, unassuming, the kind of flower you'd miss if you weren't looking for it, which I guess is what makes them perfect. I put the broken nameplate back on my mom's tree, welded it myself. Not fancy, just clean and strong. Like her. Valerie, she resigned officially 2 weeks after that board meeting, sold her house for a loss, and moved to a gated community downstate. Rumor is she's on some committee there too. I wish them luck. They'll need it. As for the HOA, the new leadership's not perfect. Nobody is, but they've actually started listening. We've got quarterly public meetings now, and I've been asked to lead a land heritage and stewardship committee. Still not sure if that's a real thing or just a fancy way of saying don't let us screw this up again, but I agreed. Why not? A few of the neighbors, the ones who used to give me side-eye when I trimmed the trees shirtless or let the wild grasses grow too high, now stop by with coffee. Some bring their kids. They walk through the orchard, point to the nameplates, and ask questions. The kids like Daniel, the stubborn tree that never grows fruit. One of them said it's their favorite because he's trying really hard. I didn't correct her. That's as good a reason as any to love something. Last Saturday, I hosted a little gathering. Nothing official, just folding chairs, a cooler full of lemonade, and some of those ridiculous homemade apple hand pies I pretend not to like, but always eat 2 of. We sat under the oldest tree, the one my granddad planted after the war, and watched the sun filter through the branches like stained glass. Walter Jenkins, yeah, the guy who used to mow the cemetery and now runs the community compost pile. He raised a plastic cup and said, "To orchards that remember." Everyone toasted. I didn't say much, just looked around and thought, yeah, that'll do. This land didn't just survive, it held the line, it remembered who it belonged to, and in the end, it made sure the people who tried to erase it walked away with empty hands and red faces. And now it grows, quietly, patiently, like it always has. And if someone asks someday if they can get married here, legitimately, with permission, with respect, maybe I'll say yes. But they better love apples, and know how to find an orchid when it blooms.